Okay. Hi, Roan. We're here to talk about socionics and quadra values. Are you ready to start?
Really? I thought we were here to talk about the lemon poppy seed muffins.
No. Only if you are a SI valuer, which you aren't, so sorry for your luck. Okay. So, what is a quadra in socionics?
Um, so a quadra is a superordinate type that is the basis of the way I see socionics. Augusta had Augusta developed the socionics with the observation that some pairs of people who appeared superficially very similar appeared to get along very well, who were mostly married, I think, and other pairs that appeared superficially the same way didn't appear to get along. And from this, she developed this superordinate grouping of types called quadras, which are types themselves, which form the basic, fundamental basis for the theory of socionics.
Okay, so there are four types of quadras, and technically this is the higher grouping of typings. So if we're talking about quadras, we could say there are four types in socionics.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, some people don't agree with this way of thinking, but it's exactly the way I see it, is that there are four types in socionics.
I don't see anything wrong with thinking about it that way. I think it simplifies things, which is nice. So what are the four super types? What are the four quadras?
What are they called? There are
Yes.
several naming systems. The most common naming system is alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, the first four letters of the Greek alphabet. But there are other naming conventions. If you read some of the Russian literature, especially Augusta's literature, you'll see them referred to as first, second, third, and fourth quadras. It's the same thing.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I've actually seen that in some of her writings, which I didn't understand the first time I saw it, but
it's just terminology.
So alpha is the first, beta is the second, gamma is the third, and delta is the fourth, right?
Yes.
Okay. So alpha, a quadra are four types that value the same elements, right? And for alpha, it's Ne, Ti, Si, and Fe.
Yes.
But specifically blocked together, Ne and Ti.
Sure. You can view it in, mathematically speaking, you can view it in several ways, right? The simplest way of thinking about it is that there are two dyads, and a combination of these two dyads determines quadra. That is to say that there is as a person, you either value Si and Ne, or you value the converse, extroverted sensation and introverted intuition, and not both. And given this dyad, you fall on one side of this dyad, and then you fall on one side or the other of the rational dyad, and taking together these scales, if you will, determine quadra.
Okay, so the scale, the alpha scale is...
No, there's not alpha scale, right? That this alpha is a combination of two scales, a linear combination of two scales.
Okay, a linear combination of two scales. What are these two scales again?
Right, it's whether or not you value introverted sensation or extroverted sensation, and also whether or not you value introverted logic or extroverted logic.
All right.
I only say one side of the scale for simplicity, right? That the dyads go together. Yeah. The valued elements go together.
Yes, and there are always two value elements that come together, and for Ne that is always Si, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then for Se it is always Fi.
I think you said it wrong, but you said for Se it is always Fi. That's what I heard, but
yeah, that is what I said. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. But I think that probably a person who is watching this video at least understands that structure.
Okay, well, all right. So, what are the valued elements in alpha? They're Ne and Ti and Se and Fe. So,
And Si and Fe.
Si and Fe.
You just misspoke. It's okay.
Ah, it's okay. um, so to value Ne and Ti, that means you do not value Fi and Fc together, and you do not value Te and Ni together. So that creates a certain flavor for those types. And let's discuss.
Well, sure, but you also don't value any other combination of elements together.
Yeah.
I mean, those combinations are opposite, but I mean, I don't know. I guess there's an open question. Some people argue about how blocking works.
Yeah.
If you're an alpha type, right, then you block. Additionally, you block Ni and Te together somehow as unvalued things.
Yeah.
And well, I'm not. I don't quite know what that means. Maybe we could have a discussion about that if you're interested in that. Set of hypotheses, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, right, so if a person values Ne and Ti, and then they also value Si and Fe, that means there are the other 6 combinations of blocked elements together that they don't value, not just the ones in the opposing quadra.
But they do block together the alphas, specifically the ILE, SEI, ESC, and LII. They block together Fi and Se as unvalued. So do you think that creates? Well, they have conflicting quadras, right?
Yeah.
So what does that even mean? Do they, specifically not like those things together in the other quadra? Is that why they don't get along?
No, I don't think that there's any meaning to the blocking, in particular the superego elements, and indeed that the one thing that you can see, this is a division that emphasizes. This is of course related to the way I see Model A very closely. There's basically alpha is the superordinate subdivision, right? There's the quadra, and then how do you subdivide the quadra? You could divide the quadra into the 4 constituent types. You can also divide the quadra in 3 other ways. You can have alpha extrovert and alpha introvert, the alpha NT and the alpha SF, and then the alpha rational and the alpha irrational. And the one of these 3 ways of subdividing, the one that generally is in my thinking the least is actually the division into dual pairs. And in my view, by far the most, sometimes I think about the clubs, but by far the most useful, I think, in general, and the ones that most closely resemble each other is the activator pairs, the alpha extroverts and the alpha introverts. And especially among these activator pairs, there's a difference in the expression of the unvalued elements. That is to say that the elements 4 and 7, take an alpha extrovert, then elements 4 and 7 are the introverted elements that are unvalued, which are Ni and Fi, are sort of not used at all. But the extroverted elements that are unvalued which are 3 and 8, which are in the case of the alpha extrovert, Se and Te, are treated
partially valued. Do you like to use that term?
Partially valued, I do use that term sometimes. They're treated differently. That's not, the best way of saying it, the most precise way of saying it, is that they're present in the individual psyche a lot of the time. Whereas the subdued elements for the butt end of the inferior axis and the leading axis are really not present at all in the psyche.
So
this is the way I see it.
Just to clarify, the alpha extroverts are ESE and ILE, and these 2 types express their subdued elements in their role function and their demonstrative function. And they express these by thinking about them consciously in their psyche at times.
Yeah, but I think that what I'm saying is right that the demonstrative and role function, just in general for all types, are partially present in the psyche, whereas the vulnerable function and the ignoring function are not present actually at all.
Right.
Or, I mean, at all. They're present in some. They're not completely absent, but they're less present than all of the other elements.
Okay. So for the alpha extroverts, the subdued elements that would not be expressed as often would be the vulnerable and the ignoring, and for those two would be Fi and Ni.
Yes.
Okay. So, and this is how these two types can appear similarly superficially.
Yeah, but so there's also a right, and I mean superficially and also deeply, in my view, these types really are very close to each other because they shared these this very close way of expression of all of the elements, not just these elements. The only the biggest difference in expression, in my view, is between elements 2 and 5, which do look somewhat different. But they sometimes element 2 is not really as visible, and sometimes element 5 is more visible. There's quite a bit of variation in these elements.
So you're talking about element 2, which is the creative function. You're saying that in the let's say in the ILE, the TI would be expressed less in some of those.
Yeah, well, I think the creative function historically in Augusta's writing is described as this element of the function that is on some of the time, but not on all of the time.
Okay.
Usually as a contrast to the program function, which is on all the time. Specifically, it's emphasized the creative function is not on all the time. So this is not dissimilar to how I view this function, which is that its emphasis is somewhat inconsistent, and the suggestive function is not usually painted in this way in Augusta's writing. Augusta's writing, I think, doesn't treat the suggestive function in all of its glory, so to speak. But if you know about the way that I see socionics in some, if you've read a lot of the writing I have to write about it and what the suggestive function does, I see the suggestive function as quite important to the individual. And as a facet of that importance, it has quite a wide range of expressions that usually have to do with the level of awareness the individual is able to use to tap into that area. Right, so again, it gets back to Augusta basically believed duality was magic, or at least believed that for long enough to write about it in Socionics very ardently. And her view of the suggestive function, the way to tap into the suggestive function is essentially to get into a dual relationship and marry your dual, or something of the sort. And
okay, so what you say is that that function can actually be leveled up, like slowly on your own, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, of course it can be leveled up, right?
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah. That to me, that's common sense. Is that you can. That Socionics is a model essentially, and that being restricted in the sense of so some people see it as restrictive. It's not a restrictive model more than a descriptive model, but in the same way, I think that what I think really is that Socionics describes the suggestive function as a deep weakness which in Augusta's formulation is healed by this magical thing called duality. But when something is a weakness, it tends to occupy a lot of conscious attention, and
but you can
people have ways of dealing with this.
There are some people that would say that there's a way of expressing your suggestive in a neuroticism, whereas you're not so aware of it, and then there's a way that you can, let's say you do become more aware of it and it's less neurotic. What
is the difference between these modes of expression?
I would say one might have more experience. The neurotic suggestive function might require other people to be constantly using this around them or something like that. Or would be highly insecure about things that are not right in this area.
You think that then it is necessary for other people to be using, let's say other people were using, whatever this means, the suggestive function around an individual, and this is a highly abstract situation, but is that something that would cause a neurotic response simply by default?
It depends on if the person is aware that they're doing this or not, right?
Okay, and what is the way in which awareness?
I don't know.
So you have a mapping of awareness levels to response outcome in this situation. What is the enumeration of this mapping?
I have no idea.
And that is to say, let's say that you are aware of the suggestive function on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Where there's a gradation of awareness, and some people are more aware than others, and let's imagine for a minute that you could be aware of your suggestive function 4 out of 5, whatever that means. What then is the effect? Yeah, I mean, this is the question, right?
I think that the effect would be that the person is able to draw upon their own experiences and try to apply this function in their own use instead of just, I don't know, draw upon their own experiences or how they have solved problems in the past or whatever using this. I don't know if that made any sense.
Well, I don't know that it does. I mean, it makes sense. I'm just not sure I agree with it.
Okay.
The way I see it is more like this, which is that the suggestive function is a weakness, and it carries all of the connotations of being a weakness, which is to say there's an erotic response, and there's how should we say, an enlightenment response, which eventually sort of tries to do what you're saying and calls upon all of the relevant experience. But the enlightened response is certainly not all the time, because people are not enlightened all the time about things in general. Needless to say, not focusing specifically on the suggestive function. This is just sort of a proxy for talking about this issue, because it's a weakness that's usually at the forefront, or sometimes not at the forefront indeed. But I would say that in either case, the sides of this function, which are, there's a neurotic response, there's also a deep lack of awareness of the appropriateness of the response, and this attention to the response that you have, because it's a weakness and because you focus conscious attention to improving it in some sense that leads to an enlightened response. All of these these responses all coexist, and they're not neatly differentiable from each other, I think. You know, in the context of an individual, you can imagine that first of all, some people are more well-adjusted than others. End of sentence. Some people simply are more able to deal with the variety of situations and adapt to them that they experience in their lives. But at the same time, you can understand in an individual, right? An individual who appears to be very adaptive in one moment could later say that they have experiencing a very great deal of inner distress for some reason that isn't obvious outwardly, or that, I mean, not everyone has the same problems, and they deal with these problems in ways that are not always the same, and the parts of these problems that occupy their conscious thoughts are not always the same, and they may be able to handle the problems in ways that appear very graceful, but in other ways aren't very graceful because there's something else that they're not keeping in mind.
Okay. So the reaction, let's say this type is a certain way, can come out of that slightly and be more enlightened and think more thoroughly in ways that are not necessarily natural, but in general the person acts in line with their expression. If, like,
You're saying that in general, the most common mode of expression is lack of awareness?
well, for the suggestive or the weaker elements.
Let's say the suggestive specifically, because I would
Well,
endorse
let's look
that comment is that the most common mode of expression for the suggestive function is unawareness. But I wouldn't say that's true for the mobilizing, for instance, where
Okay.
some people are indeed not very aware of their mobilizing function. But I think that it's much easier for people to have the mobilizing function as something very present in their conscious thinking than for the suggestive function, which is much more deeply embedded.
But both functions, technically, both functions are weakness, though. Is that correct?
I think it's a matter of semantics in some sense, because what you're saying is consistent with Augustus' model, yes. As you might know, I think that Augusta, the main thing that does not at all match what I think in Augustus' model is the vulnerable function, the character of the vulnerable function, which is, as you know from our previous discussions, she sees it as a weak spot, it's a source spot, also a weak spot, and I see it as not a source spot at all, it's a blind spot. The function that is closely related to the vulnerable function is, in fact, the mobilizing function, which is reflects the same dimension as the vulnerable function. And I think Augustus writing sorry?
The mobilizing function reflects the same dimension.
The same dimension, yeah, the same domain, right? So in the case of the LSE, then they're both about intuition. They're just the different flavors of intuition, right? The mobilizing function is a little bit awkward in the way that Augusta formulates it. Where clear, for one thing, it's very clear that the mobilizing function is more conscious than the suggestive function. This is true of Augusta's descriptions about it as well. But yes, indeed, she says that this is a super id function and this is a weak function by extension. I can see what she's talking about, particularly as it relates to the character of the mobilizing function. You can see it in some people, especially in teenagers. Not to pick on teenagers, but especially in teenagers, you can see that. I think it's often in the adolescence that is the formative years where people become more aware. This is an easier. This is like level 2, and then sometime later you'll get to level 10, and you'll sort of unlock all the secrets to enlightenment or something like that. But first you have to get to level 2, and it's a lot easier for people to get to level 2 than it is for them to achieve Nibbana and become Arant and whatever that is, assuming that even means anything.
So look, in the alpha, the mobilizing is the FE function, in the ILE, the mobilizing is FE, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and the vulnerable is FI. For the ESE, the mobilizing is NI or NE.
Intuition, yeah.
And okay, so the SEI.
The question, I don't know what you're saying. What are the mobilizing functions for these various types? Yes. Yes. The question you asked is, what is the is a mobilizing function a weak function? In my view, that's not a very helpful characterization.
Okay.
Because in most individuals that you observe, the most mobilizing function isn't going to present itself as a weak function. It's going to present itself as the sort of level 2 realization, or the level 3 realization, or something like this, which is as a function which is very present and stubbornly present.
Okay. So you're saying that it's going to present itself as strong, right? In most people.
say that it is present
Okay.
in the way that people are thinking, in people's awareness. So what does that mean, whether or not something is strong or not? Well, first of all, I don't really think in terms of strong and weak functions, not very readily. There are some functions, for instance, the first function is sort of always strong, right? And the fourth function is never strong, or the seventh function is never strong, things like this.
Okay, so the seventh function is...
No, okay, fine, the seventh function. This is the way I think of it, right? The first and sixth functions are strong, and the fourth and seventh functions aren't strong. But again, what do you mean by strong? Because this is at odds with the terms of the model that Augusta put forward. And okay. I don't think that those are very useful, right? What is the usefulness of saying that the sixth function is weak? Okay, that's clear enough what the usefulness of saying the sixth function is weak is. What is the usefulness of saying the seventh function is strong? That eludes me.
Well,
does that make sense? Do you follow what I'm saying here? Why I'm making that?
Yeah, because the seventh function is one that you don't really think about often, right? Or, I mean, like, do you think about it? It's just kind of like mixed in with, say...
My view is that you don't think about it. It's basically a blind spot, just like the fourth function.
But you acquire enough information to use it, like if you're presented with a problem that requires it.
No, I don't think that that's not the way I see it. The way I see it is that it's not. It's a blind spot like the fourth function.
Okay.
I think that there's any issues with, like, if you are forced into a situation where you have to use it, I think that's an enormously subtle question.
Okay, let's look at
it's not. I don't think it's really worth thinking about the seventh function in that way. The eighth function is different. But
okay. Okay, so
my view of seeing it, and it might be different from the way that other people see it.
All right, so you would say that the seventh function is the seventh function is just weak, and that's all there is to it, really. Just they just don't really use it.
I don't use the word weak, but yes, this is the way I see it.
You use the terminology blind spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about quadra values, if we can.
Yeah.
Okay, so for alpha, one thing that I know about this type is that they like to keep like an upbeat emotional atmosphere, and it's usually positive emotions and like pleasantness, like SI, I guess, would be they want to be pleasant and things like this, right? Or do you not see it that way?
I would put it a little differently, but yes. I see that alpha has the theme of positive emotionality.
Okay. So, okay, I know nothing about this quadra's values except that how, like, say I know someone who is an ESC, and I don't know if this is consistent over the whole quadra, but it seems as though they would really just prefer to use positive emotions. Like, they prefer people around them to be expressing positive emotions. They prefer to express those positive emotions. And they don't really like it when people express negative emotions or, yeah.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that they can't really express negative emotions when they're feeling very negative. So do you think that this is something that transfers across the whole quadra? Like, is this an alpha trait? Do you try to remain upbeat and positive?
Say more specific. To try to remain themselves upbeat and positive?
Or is that just natural for them? They don't really have to try.
It's certainly common to a lot of alpha types. Probably most characteristically is the SEI that has difficulty with presenting themselves as negative. They view themselves as being a burden to others if they appear to be too negative. And this is often an issue of a conscious issue for them, right? Is they may not necessarily be positive, may not necessarily be optimistic internally, but they see the optimism of others, or I suppose more directly the the they see others having their needs met and being able to act joyfully as a reflection perhaps of their own internal difficulties with being optimistic. Not everybody, but it's a common theme, I think, in some alpha types, and particularly in SEIs sometimes. And I think that it's shared by all alphas to some extent, but it's much easier for certain of the alpha types to drift from this, particularly ILEs, who can sometimes be relatively insensitive to the way that other people around them respond to the joyfulness or lack thereof of their messages.
Would you say that it's a quadra value for alpha to try to remain joyful, or to create a joyful air?
Yes, but it's the same issue, is that not all of the... I don't think that all of the alphas express this quite equally. Right, for instance, creating atmosphere of positive emotionality and appreciating atmosphere of positive emotionality are somewhat different things. Right, for instance, the creating an air of an atmosphere of positive emotionality is something that, for instance, ESEs are often focused on doing actively, and sometimes ILEs also, but very little, for instance, in the LII. It's something that's quite difficult.
But they appreciate it when others do that.
Sometimes, often. But again, it relates to whether or not it taps into something that they're aware of. In some cases, they're not aware of it, and they may be inclined to dismiss the idea of the atmosphere around them being positive.
Okay. Would you say ILEs are also like that? Or SEIs?
To some extent. I think that it's much easier for ILEs to be aware of the atmosphere around them being positive. And I think that SEIs like some of the any ego types have perhaps an element of uncertainty to them in terms of not figuring out exactly the way in which they want to influence the situation and exactly how they act in it on a conscious level. But in spite of that uncertainty, they're often contributors to the atmospheres of positive emotionality.
I think I would agree with that. Okay, so some types are able to contribute to the positive emotionality of the group better than others in the alpha quadra.
Well, it's an individual dynamics, right? And particularly individual dynamics with respect to the super-id functions, as we've been discussing, right? This is not all of this diatribe about what does it mean for the mobilizing function to be strong and things like this. These are not unrelated to these topics. If you ask what is the expression of quadra values among each, because the way I see it, again, the quadra is as a type.
Mm-hmm.
All of the alpha types express positive emotionality, they merely do so in slightly different flavors, but they're all express positive emotionality. And they'll certainly have the potential to be expressing positive emotionality in the same way.
Okay. All right. So positive emotionality is a quadra value of alpha. Okay. So alphas also they like to talk about theoretical topics. They like to. The way I kind of see it is almost they're almost indirect. They don't really like to talk about like concrete things, especially like. Honestly, I see the ESE doing this, but okay. So the NE, what kind of flavor does that add to the alpha quadra? The NE and SI blocked together. I don't even know if those are the two that are blocked together. There's an NETI.
Can you, as I said, I was going to ask you about this if you came with that question, is what about that are you confused about? So you described, I don't have a, this is of the 8 quadra themes, I have the least compelling name for this, which is essentially abstract structure. But I understand what you're talking about, right? And I'm open to finding a better name because I don't like that name, but I've called it that in some of my writing. Not too much of it, really, because I don't talk about this quadra is one of the most difficult for me to understand. And I think that's reflected in my writing. But anyway, what about it are you confused about?
I don't know if I'm even confused about it. I don't even know what I said now. Okay. Do you acknowledge that there is like alpha and gamma would be conflicting quadras?
They're opposing quadras.
Yeah. Okay. What does that mean to you?
I would say this. It means that the messages of the alpha quadra are more directly mutually exclusive with the messages of the gamma quadra than they are with the adjacent quadras.
Okay, and the adjacent quadras are beta and delta.
Yeah.
And they share values with beta and delta. Okay, which values do they share with beta? It's the FE and TI. Okay, so do you see these quadras as similar, the beta and alpha?
They're more similar, I would say, than alpha and gamma.
Okay. All right, well, let's talk about beta. Okay. I've heard you say that beta is the most dynamic quadra.
Sure.
What does that mean?
The way I see what it means is that beta has the greatest range of expressions. That is, by nature, the expressions of what it means to be a beta quadra theme are quite variable, depending on the place of life and the character of the specific expression.
You said the place of life?
Yeah.
As in their experiences that they've acquired?
Yes, but also that people are in different stages of life and have different views and things which evolve over the course of one's life. And in the beta quadra, for instance, the relevance of what place you are in life is greater than in that of other quadras, where you can be. One of the themes in beta is ideological conflict, and this means that betas have a tendency, not always, but as part of their values have a tendency to subscribe to one particular set of rules describing the world. But as they subscribe to one particular set of rules, sometimes the ideology to which they subscribe rapidly changes and appears suddenly. They went from seeing the world one way to suddenly seeing it a different way and occupying a very different place in their lives and possibly in society, which can appear to be a very abrupt transition to the outside, which may or may not be an abrupt transition internally, but it's merely a shift in the set of rules and not in the overall values or structure.
Okay, so depending on their place in life, their values can change drastically. So, do they, basically what you're saying is they take their ideologies very seriously, and those ideologies can
No,
differ.
I don't think. I wouldn't say that betas always take some betas for sure take their ideologies very seriously. So do some alphas.
Okay.
I would say that the idea of structure, pedagogical clarity for what is the purpose of, how the world works and what is the how the world works is not quite the right way of saying it. I would say, what are the rules by which the world works?
Okay, and this is
an important conscious dilemma for these types,
okay.
regardless of the degree to which their answer to this question of what are the rules in which the world operates by, regardless of whether or not they satisfactorily answer that question in their conscious awareness or their internal dialogue.
Okay.
I realize it's sort of a densely packed abstraction, but
No.
I think it's pretty easy to apply that abstraction to lived examples.
The IEI and the LSI, the SLE, and the EIE are the types that we're talking about. Okay, so sorry, you said that this is a conscious question that they have, whether they're aware of it or not. Is that what you said?
Yes, but I mean something somewhat deliberate by saying that. Right, a conscious dilemma means that it's in the same way that a weakness is a conscious dilemma when it becomes played into conscious awareness. The meaning of being a conscious dilemma is that it's sort of a pressure point for these types, if you will. Does it make sense? What I'm saying about what is the meaning of being a conscious dilemma?
I mean, it's an abstract thing, but I mean, yes, I think it makes sense. It makes sense to the experience that I've gathered, but I don't know about other people.
A conscious dilemma isn't always. I could use other words than conscious dilemma. Maybe another good word is a pressure point on these types. It isn't necessarily always a focus of conscious attention, but perhaps has the potential to become a focus of conscious attention. You could call it that way. Yeah, makes some sense to me. You are still muted.
Okay, that's not something that I would have considered not being a conscious dilemma of those types.
Okay, yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it's interesting, opposing idea. So, uh, okay, what about this idea of social hierarchies? Do you think that that is a thing that actually exists in reality with these types?
Um, Basically, no. Um, I understand why this is referred to as a theme, uh, but I mean, it's not part of my writing. I don't talk about the social hierarchies that betas get into, and I think it's a possible way of seeing uh, seeing the some types in this quadra sometimes. But for instance, has almost nothing to do with IEIs, who are likely to precisely to shun the idea of being a social, right? And if you think about what is the dynamic, um, being in a social hierarchy. Okay, so this is a concept in ideology, right? This is a concept stemming from TI and SE, which is that basically saying these are the rules of, say, our organization by which you should abide in order to these are the rules by which you should abide. And if you don't abide by these rules, then there will be consequences. As in, like, there are many organizations for which this is very pertinent, right? Like, I don't know, the mafia has a code of conduct, and if you're a member of the mafia and you don't abide by the code of conduct, then they'll kill you or something like this. And this is important in the sense, I'm not trying to make comparisons, but between the mafia and military organizations. But for instance, military organizations are the same way. Is right. I mean, they're not going to kill you if you don't abide by the rules, but you will get court-martialed if you don't abide by all the rules. Or maybe you won't get court-martialed, but you'll have to like clean the toilets or whatever. And this is just these are parts of the way that these organizations operate.
Okay.
And certain organizations operate. And of course, the structure of these organizations has to do with rules and applying these rules and basically forceful implementation of the rules rather than an abstract implementation of the rules.
What would be an example of an abstract implementation of the rules? Like, let's say you're at work and you get a white slip for coming in late. Is that still?
I don't think there's. What is abstract about that? That doesn't.
Yeah,
seem
well, I didn't think that was
all.
abstract. It's just not very similar to your idea.
What's an example of an abstract implementation of the rule? I mean, one example is to say that somebody comes in. So you have a military general, right? And the military general says, okay, or let's say a military sergeant, and the sergeant says, all of the privates today have to do their do the things on this schedule, and that means that this following list of 10 names have to go clean the toilets, and this list of 10 names have to go and I don't know, clean the boat or whatever, and then you have another guy, like let's say the guy's boss, the sergeant's boss, who comes in and says that it's not, the boat isn't very dirty and it's not very important for the boat to get cleaned, but what would happen if we instead decided to put our manpower to use in a different way, that say instead of having all of the privates do the duties that are assigned to them on the task roster, if instead we had them sit at their desk and brainstorm ideas. I don't know, that's not a good example, but let's say that like we have them maybe there's another way of like that the organization could run. So instead of having them do their duties, let's let them do whatever they want, and then see if the toilets get cleaned later. See if anyone decided to clean the toilets, and maybe the whole organization will operate better. I don't know. These are not good examples. Maybe a better example is in
That's
like, I don't know. Well, the example that I always use for this, and it's not the ideal example, but it's a good enough example, is Robespierre, who is the namesake for the LII type, who was interested in law, deeply interested in law, essentially, and in the impersonal carrying out of justice. But as a person, he did this in a somewhat abstract way, really not thinking about the consequences of the ways in which his way of meting out justice really affected people. So an example, for instance, is the ideas that are enshrined in law for figures like Robespierre or Thomas Jefferson, who developed all of these principles in his head about how people should act and how the government should interact with these people, rather than really applying them in something concrete that and in some concrete way. Although eventually many of the principles did become concrete, but certainly not all of them.
when these ideas were created, they weren't really looking at really the way things.
Well,
happen.
I think they, in some cases they were. I think, for instance, in the case of Maximilien Robespierre, there was a lot more that Robespierre was not considering about the details of implementing his ideas about law and how people should operate in the sort of the early days of the French Revolution. That clearly blindsided him. But there's the other side of this is you have people who envision things about the law in ways that have not become reality at all. Ron Paul is an example here, where he would love to live in some kind of libertarian utopia, which doesn't exist, and maybe it can exist or maybe it can't exist. That it's hard to tell because it resembles nothing like the concrete way of government operating that we see in society now. So yeah, I have difficulty discussing that the abstract structure concepts. I need some better examples, as you can tell. Ways.
Okay. No, we were talking about beta, so maybe instead of talking about abstract concepts, we can just talk about what is not abstract, and that is that if they were going to.
Well, so what we talked about is social hierarchies, right? So this is a hierarchy in the sense that it is a beta theme to have organizations that operate in this way, where there's a very clear set of rules that has to do with a hierarchy. But I tend to think that this is almost nothing to do with the way that betas think about the world that they live in consciously. The majority of beta individuals. And part of it is because it strongly conflicts with their sense. So one theme of beta that is important, which is somewhat difficult to grasp the reasons why, I think, is authenticity, which is particularly important in the IEI that also has demonstrative FI, where so betas value in addition to valuing ideological conflict, they have a value of passionate energizability, which is essentially they value the intensity of the expression of their internal state. And for people that value the expression of their internal state, they view, as other FE valuing types do, the self as somewhat volatile and dynamic and easily changeable. Partly because FE types themselves are easily changeable. They have many emotions that are rapidly changeable, and they seem to lack a sense of self. And as a consequence, they also view other people as just as malleable, often incorrectly, but sometimes correctly.
do you think this is something that the SLE and the LSI share?
Yes.
Okay. The lack of sense of self, is that something that you think is across the board with
The lack of sense of self. What did I say? I don't think I used exactly those terms.
Well, you did say that, but I
sorry,
see
I
that.
forget what was the context. I don't remember.
I don't know.
Tell me
You
what I
said
said.
something about the FI in these types, and I've heard somebody else say this about NFs.
Oh, okay. Lack of sense of self. Yeah. So this is a thing. It's a tricky thing to talk about. I would say that the lack of sense of self, put another way, I'll say it a slightly different way. A lack of stable sense of self is a key issue, mostly for the EIE. Also somewhat accessible to the IEI and to the SLE, but most poignant for the EIE. Sense of self is just a difficult word because the self, what is meant by the self is very specific to the context that you're speaking of, because it means a lot of things. People's self-concepts become very complicated.
This could be maybe something that they consciously think about because of they view themselves as changeable, and they want to express themselves. Is the lack of sense of stable self related to their desire to express themselves fully in the moment?
Yes, but somewhat indirectly. I mean, I think that both of those are sort of sides of who they are. And these are, I was getting, because I think that the understanding the basic concepts are important to understanding the more complex thing that I was talking about, which eventually will relate to this question of social hierarchy. But I think that
okay, so you don't think that those are the basic expressions of this quadra? You think that those are just
the base? Well, I mean, these are, you get into difficult messages, but the most basic messages of the quadra, I say, are ideological conflict and passionate energizability. And then you get into some other somewhat more intricate territory. And I don't know if you had other questions, but I have ways of talking about that territory that are
okay. No, I just thought that those were important points. The ideological conflict and the passionate energizability.
sure.
So,
And all the other themes I think are important, but I think it's difficult to understand what is the key concept. I don't know that that's a useful distinction even, right? Because they're all important concepts, except that the different types express them a little differently. And I think the IEI is the most, the EIA is the broadest emotional range, but the IEI is the most difficult in some sense, because whereas the EIE really has the lack of stable sense of self, and sometimes these individuals are often able to see that of themselves, right? The lack of stability in themselves, sometimes I can think of people from the board that this is sort of true of, and many of them I think would recognize it, and some of them might not. But the lack of stability is often somewhat on the surface. There's very little, there's so little grounding that it becomes obvious to them often. But in the IEIs, it's more subtle because there's more grounding, partly because of demonstrative FI. The way I see it is that they're more grounded in the way that they appear, and also that that in some sense also they recognize, not necessarily consciously, that in fact there's not much stability in the way that they act, and therefore the authentic expression of what they are becomes very important to them, because they view a lot of people as interacting. They view the other people around them as interacting, not necessarily with stability. And they view most of their interactions with the world around them as essentially superficial, as dynamically changing, and reserve this idea of having a stable interaction for only the situations that they feel that it matters. And so the question of authenticity, especially their own authenticity towards the outside situations in the world, and actually showing themselves that they can be stable, becomes a conscious question. And this is why, for instance, if you imagine the beta type, just for a moment, imagine that all of the beta types express it in the same way, which they do to some extent, but the II is the most pressing issue of authenticity. Somebody who is concerned about authenticity and concerned about the way that they convey the messages of themselves as a person. What sort of person am I, and is the way that I am comporting myself consistent with the sense of person that I am? A person with that message on their mind is not also paying very much attention to the hierarchy of the way that other people around them are interacting. In fact, they're often oriented towards the hierarchy of other people around them as something irrelevant, something that has nothing to do with the authenticity of their interaction. And really, I think this is something that all of the beta types share. Probably SLE's least so. But I think that dynamic makes it so that this question of being in a social hierarchy is not a very conscious issue for these types.
Okay. Do you think that, say, when they come together as a group, they sort of do form a social hierarchy, but not necessarily on purpose or consciously?
No.
No? Okay.
I mean, I would be willing to entertain counterexamples, but I am not. I don't know that I'm convinced by the obvious counterexamples that I would be able to think of. I guess it doesn't seem like a. Again, I don't think that these are a very conscious focus, so I don't think that this is true. Not really, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe you have a different view.
The only thing that I see as applicable to this is that the people who have SE in their ego generally do, in many situations, tend to act as a leader or attempt to assert themselves.
What does that have to do with the hierarchy? But for instance, the SEs would be the same way as this. And in fact, they are, right? SEs can have positions in some kind of a social hierarchy just as easily.
Yes.
And this is probably SE and SLE. The SLE probably has the least focus on this question of authenticity, but I think it's very accessible to them as well. So I don't.
By very accessible, do you mean that it's something that they can think about?
Yeah, exactly. And that it becomes a pressure point, a very conscious issue that isn't always a focus of awareness.
So what do you mean by pressure point?
That's what I mean by it. It's a very conscious issue that isn't always the focus of awareness.
Okay. A conscious issue that is not always... Okay, that makes sense. All right, so the idea of social hierarchy, basically you don't see it that way. And a lot of people do see it this way, and then a lot of people also say that they don't really observe this.
Well, I mean, I guess I might be living in my own world a little bit, having these ideas of quadras that I've had for many years. But who sees it this way? Like, is this really a thing that Jack talks about as an important facet of beta quadra? Because it's not something that... I mean, I understand beta quadra is a difficult quadra, and a lot of the themes I think are really important, like this thing about authenticity, are not addressed in other people's work. For instance, Augusta doesn't address authenticity as a part of her writing, not very clearly anyway. She does kind of. I mean, if you think about IEIs and what is the character of an IEI, but I think that my answer to the question of what is a character of an II is much more complex than Augusta's answer, and also much more complex than Jack's answer. And I don't think that either of them treat. I don't think that Augusta treats the beta as fundamentally having a social hierarchy. She does in some sense describe it this way, but yeah, I don't think it's a very important theme. And I guess who does think it is a very important theme?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't really even care. But I mean, it's definitely a thing that's thrown around when people talk about beta. So,
well,
I think it's
by whom?
By whom? I don't know. I don't memorize people that much. So.
Okay.
But it's just whatever. You don't agree with that. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that on a quadra basis. But it's relevant to the idea of what SE is and what it means to value SE.
What does that mean?
It means the question about social, even you addressing the social hierarchies is relevant to SE.
In what way?
Well, I mean, you might see it differently than me, but in some ways, I think that the types that value SE, or the types that have SE in their ego, do assert themselves over other people.
What does that have to do with social hierarchy?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even know.
It seems to me like it has to do with, right, as you said, an SE dominant types, let's say, often want to try to play the role of the leader in a group. Okay, fine, but that doesn't have to do with a social hierarchy. They're not necessarily trying to implement a social hierarchy, including in the SLE's case. Okay. Rather, they're trying to sort of get what they want, right? There's an aspect of conscious volition, and how do I interact with the situation in order to get what I want? Which I think is more closely aligned with what you're talking about than this idea that it's important to implement a social hierarchy.
Other ways that people talk about this is saying something like the SLE kind of like gathers together people that can help them do what they want and things like that. I don't know. So I don't have a great grasp of what a social hierarchy even is. So it's not even relevant at this point. Okay, so we have. Let's talk about.
I think it takes some issue to that, right? The SLE is the person that collects people that can help them. It's very difficult to respond to that because it's quite general. I think it's the SEE that collects people that can help them, right? And the SE is not really very attentive to people. They collect people maybe in a very hands-off way. And I don't know that, okay, they could be, I can understand in what way that the SLE views people as objects with particular uses in an emotionally sterile way. But going out of one's way to collect those objects is a little bit more abstract, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not
really
sure
what I meant either.
I don't know. It's difficult to say, but I'm not sure that I quite agree with this. But individual cases vary.
Okay. It's actually something that I heard Galenko say, but I might be.
Okay, well, I'm not interested in what this says.
I know you're not. Anyway, okay. Okay, so let's talk about what SE is, like how the Beta Quadra would express SE. Is this just them being attentive to their physical environment or aware of a more concrete world than other quadras?
What does it mean to value SE?
Yes.
It means to have greater attentiveness to external demands than internal demands.
Okay. Think about that. Okay, so internal demands would be something like eating or emotions.
This room is too hot.
Okay.
I don't like the room because it's too hot. Which is something that SE types are sometimes sensitive to, but usually they're not really that sensitive to it, right? They're more sensitive towards whatever it is they actually want out of the world at large, which can sometimes be quite erratic, right? As particularly in SE dominant types, they're not always aware of what they want from the world at large, but they will sometimes decide that they want some particular thing and then set out to attain it. And pay very little attention to whether or not the room is hot while they're on the process of attaining it.
Saying that they're paying attention to the room is hot sounds like an external demand, but it's an internal demand because they're actually thinking about how it feels to them, right?
Unless the room being hot is itself the focus of whatever their goal is, then it is not an external demand, right?
Okay. Well, what is an external demand? Is it covering?
It is the focus of whatever the goal is, right? So there's some, right? As I said, imagine an SE dominant type, right? The goal is the SE dominant type is an impulsive person that sometimes decides on a whim to become the emperor of China, and then they decide to go and do all of the things that would be needed in order to do this. And maybe they will quickly see that it's not actually very feasible because they didn't think very far ahead, that there's a process in place for how to become the emperor of China. And it's not very easy for them to do it because they're actually a citizen of the United States and they're not going to go and do it very easily. But in any case, right, that was their goal. They didn't think it through very quickly. They did think it through very quickly, right? Which is to say they didn't think it through at all. And they erratically set some goal for themselves and then sought to meet the conditions of achieving that goal and accomplishing it. And whether or not they actually did accomplish it is another matter. The point is that assume that this impulsive person who is deeply invested, at least for the moment, in becoming the emperor of China, might have to sit in a room with some bureaucrats that happens to be a little bit hot and do this anyway, rather than give up their goal to be the emperor of China, would just sit in the room for a few minutes while they get called to the DMV to get a license plate number they want.
Oh God. Okay, so is it true that SE is about attaining new ground or controlling things or wanting more or wanting something and getting that?
Wanting something and getting it, I would say, sure. And I would say the attaining ground sometimes, but it isn't necessarily related to the goals that are concretely held.
Okay. All right. So, but it's about the external world and how they interact with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And the internal world would that be more NE and TI and SI?
Well, I don't understand what TI, but so by internal demands, external demands, exactly what you said, is the way in which one interacts with the external world to get whatever they're looking to get out of it. The nature of an internal demand is the immediate lived experience of themselves in the world, of the individual in their environment. So what is the quality of their environment, and what is the lived experience of the individual being in that environment, whatever its quality. So for instance, one quality could be that the environment is too hot. It's 100 degrees and it's uncomfortable.
Okay, so basically, I could. It's all right. So, are you saying that the opposite of, or not the opposite, but anyway, SE and SI are basically focused on the same things. You've said this before, but they're different directions of the same thing. So, I think one time I've heard this. Is this a true statement that SE would be more about impacting the world or doing what you wanted in the physical world, and then SI would be more about accepting the world as it is and trying to enjoy that, or trying to accept that or something.
Yes, but I wouldn't put it in these ways. I would put it a little differently. To outline, for instance, the ways in which they're similar, right? So SE and SI are both about the experience of the world, the way the individual appraises their experience about the world. And the SE focuses on the experience about the world with respect to what they interact with. An introverted sensation doesn't focus on the experience of the world with respect to what they interact with. Rather, it focuses on the experience, the immediate lived experience of the world. So what can you repeat the part of your question, the last part of your question? Because I had something to say about it and I forgot. You're muted.
I know. I think I have a long running script, and it's like keeping me from being able to do things quickly. So,
okay.
All right. I think what I said was that SI is more about trying to accept the world the way it is, or trying to experience the world in a pleasurable way, or
yeah. So the way that I would say being attentive to the quality of the world around you, the immediate quality of the world around you, has something to do with accepting, I think. I think fundamentally it has something to do with accepting the world around you. But a better way of saying that is that the individual is attentive not to the way that they can impact the world around them, but to the way in which they can best fit themselves into the experience of the ongoing world around them. Finding the appropriate position by which to maximize the goodness of fit between their individual and their surroundings. You can see in what way this has to do with any as well.
No, I can't. But let me just see if I understood you correctly. If I can contrast SI and SE really quick.
Okay.
SI would be about seeing how you best fit into your environment. I mean, because is that still correct? Because I think I changed
Sure.
the terminology. Okay. And then SE is more about how to make the environment fit to you. So that's how they would be opposites almost.
Yeah, a little simplified, but yes.
Okay.
It's very similar to the way I see it.
Okay. Well, all right. So how does what you said about SI go with any?
In the aspect that it seeks to optimize something. Maybe I don't fully disambiguate these two elements in this case. But there's a part where there's an attentiveness to the world, and there's a part where there's which you could view the attentiveness to the world itself, the lived experience of the world, as SI, and then the part where you optimize that experience within the constraints of the problem as the any part of the problem, which is what any does, right? It optimizes the situation without changing the without, for instance, forcefully going in and demanding that the problem be different, but rather finding a clever way, so to speak, of altering the conditions to do something better without expending unneeded effort in the process of doing something better. But the thing that I would mention, the reason why I don't disambiguate these maybe as cleanly as somebody else might, is because in the context of a physical solution, right, in the context of the solution which has to do with optimizing the individual towards the condition of their environment, is often something that's practiced by the SI ego type and not by the NE ego type that isn't aware of the physical environment in the first place. As an example,
Wait, what type is not aware of the physical environment?
the NE ego type, right, which has the SI suggestive.
Okay.
So, I mean, what as an example of this, right, because as a concrete example, suppose that you have an SI dominant type and an NE dominant type who are on a hike. This is not so loosely based on personal experience. And the NE dominant type basically thinks of this hike as this is an opportunity to have a hike, see what's there. Let's explore this unknown little playground and see what is there. Or I'm understating things in a stupid way. Let's go explore this forest, this abandoned forest that no one has ever been to before, and see what is there. Isn't it cool? Let's go. We'll see what happens. And in doing so, they go and walk around the forest for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then they get thirsty. But they were so excited about exploring the forest that they didn't bring any water. But if they have the SI person along, the SI person was anticipating in advance the quality of their physical state and said, oh, I might get thirsty, and then brought the water. Again, loosely based on my personal experience as somebody that doesn't remember to bring water when I go and walk in parks.
On 10-minute hikes.
Yeah, on 10-minute hikes.
Into little playgrounds.
Well, that is, yes, that is loosely based on my experience, but it was not very well stated in any case. I wouldn't say that the hikes had to do with playgrounds. I have a park in mind that has a playground, but it also has a forest, which is Inwood Hill Park. So if anyone is familiar with the area, why would anyone be familiar with the area of our 5 viewers? There's like a little playground, like where the A train stops, but then there's also like a big forest. Like not a big forest, but like there's like you can walk up on the rocks above where like the Henry Hudson Parkway goes, and then like there's a forest there. As far as like couldn't be a forest in Manhattan, there's a forest there.
Yeah, a little teeny forest.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is so funny.
It has like, at least like 10 or 15 square feet of forest. In New York City, this is a lot. I know you come from like a place where like there is nothing and there's only forests for like 100 miles around you, and there's no people, only forests. But we come from a different setting and we have to be content with what we have.
Yes, you should be content with a little patch of grass under an apple tree. A crab apple tree. That's so funny.
And now I don't live in New York anymore. I actually have like a backyard with has like some dirt in it.
Did you ever dig in the dirt?
No.
You should.
But there are like some weeds growing.
Are you gonna pull them out?
No.
Okay. Well, you need a little bit of interaction with the forest, so I'd recommend doing that.
Well, the thing is that like every day, like I walk down the sidewalk for a little while, so I think that's good enough.
Okay.
Anyway, the
probably is good.
the point that I want to say, right, is that the SI type is attentive to whether or not they're going to need the water, right? There's a predetermined attention to the physical state. Even like, so that's the realistic example, is that the SI type brings water and the NE type doesn't bring water, even if the common stereotype that the NE type forgets to eat is usually unfounded in my view. But the common stereotype adjusted to the idea that they will not remember to bring water, I think is correct. Let's be even more simple and say that really the SI type is focused on optimizing the environment around them to best interact with the environment around them, to optimize the conditions. Let's say that the environment is too hot. The thermostat reads 100 degrees and it's very hot in a house. And the SI type decides to turn the thermostat down. And the NE type doesn't notice that the thermostat is reading too high and doesn't turn it down, despite in some theoretical way suffering from the negative conditions of their environment without fully realizing it, perhaps. Again, in some theoretical way, the part where they don't bring water is more realistic.
Yeah, because you actually need water.
Well, because it's an anticipatory demand. I think this is really true of the any dominant types in particular, is that they don't really anticipate physical constraints. But there's the common stereotype, right, is that they forget to eat. If it's 100 degrees in their room, they wouldn't notice because they're just not attentive to the physical environment. If they, I don't know, other things like they forget to clean their apartment and then they don't respect the degree to which having a clean apartment affects their internal state, which might be more realistic. But the thing that isn't realistic is another stereotype of SLEs, which I don't think is very common in the English community, but it's something that exists in the Russian community, is that the ILE walks into like telephone poles because they're not aware that they're there. And you know, the majority of these conditions are not terribly realistic scenarios for a competent human person to be who is not dead yet to experience. But I think the scenario of the failing to anticipate that you will get thirsty and want water because you were just not thinking about it is completely realistic.
I would definitely think about it, but then I would just decide that I didn't care.
Well, that is another approach.
Okay, so
I mean, you can understand, you can see very clearly the way in which you are not thinking of internal demands, and what you just said is, oh, I don't. I would be thinking, oh, I'll just like not care that I don't have any water, and therefore will.
No, it would just be like an annoying. I would not die of thirst. I would definitely dig a hole until water came into it before I died. Okay, no, I didn't mean to say that. What I meant to say was that I don't remember. We were on topic. Shit. It completely just went out of my head. Yeah, it would just be like an annoying thing that just didn't really matter as much. Unless life and death were on the line, then it would matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so NE seeks to optimize something, and SI seeks to optimize conditions of the world. So NE and SI together in a quadra.
Closely related, and you can see that the way I'm describing SI is, well, the SI type also values NE. They have NE as a quite important element of their psyche. They bleed into each other in the way that SE expresses itself in a realistic setting, and I incorporate this into my definition And perhaps some people wouldn't do it quite that way, but I think it's more useful.
I think that MBTI kind of acknowledges that those two things. Some of their descriptions, it's.
Sorry, you cut out. I didn't hear what you said.
I've seen MBTI definitions that they look at the functions that they value, and then they look at the shadow function, and then they explain how they work together. Like they kind of mix in the SE and SI together in types sometimes.
I'm not really familiar with that very much. Not from. I haven't looked at like a lot. I mean, there are a lot of models that purport to be advanced, and I'm mostly not interested in them. So they're like focus on shadow functions, like BB's model and things like this. I don't know if shadow functions are even a part of BB's model, but I think they are. I think it's an 8-function model.
I have no idea.
So I don't know, but it's not something that I'm used to seeing in the MBTI literature.
No, the first time I saw it actually was either yesterday or the day before. Yeah, because I was
somebody
trying
has
to.
thought of it. It's not that's not shocking, but
No, it was on a. Oh.
You cut out.
Yeah, just cut out again. If I can find the link, I'll show it to you, but it's not that important. Okay, let's talk about the Gamma Quadra and Gamma themes. And I think I know this one's pretty good. Well, actually, for beta, do you think that the beta types are... Do you think that seriousness is a quadra value of theirs?
What does that mean?
I don't know. Well, okay, let's talk about gamma, and then I'll ask you that again. So I think that gammas are serious types, and that means that they are focused on the present reality, and they are focused on achieving things. I don't know. It's kind of vague.
You are not. Are you talking about the Rhinean sense of the word serious? Because it doesn't sound like you are.
No, I consider. I think that SE and TE together is serious, especially with FI.
So if you're talking about like a colloquial sense of the word serious, yeah, I would say it's okay.
But not like completely serious, just more serious than the other quadras.
It strikes me that the ILI is, and this is actually traced to Augusta's writing initially, right? The ILI is not outwardly serious. I think that there's something right? That there's something, but this is true of some other types as well. There's something that there's something about taking things seriously that I think is important to this quadra. But
is it more about being practical, or is it more about like saying what you mean and, you know?
Yeah, but that's an element of all of FI valuing types, right?
Okay.
So I would say that that's true. But it's something that all of the FI types prefer the subdued interactive style, where they don't have to guess at understanding people's emotions. Regarding serious, it's a difficult thing to describe in the colloquial terms because, and I think it's true, although it's a little bit difficult to understand, is that the Augusta describes the ILI as externally goofy, and somebody who is opaque to the inner world is opaque. And
what do you mean by opaque? Because that's a color.
No, it's opaque is not a color.
Okay.
Something that is not transparent, something that cannot be seen inside.
Wait, something that is not transparent?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't see inside of a thing that is opaque.
Okay.
For instance, a window, most windows are, they are transparent. You can see something that is outside of a window. But then if you
Yes.
covered a window with blue paint, then you couldn't be able to see outside of the window. You would just see blue, and then it would be opaque.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So opaque is opposite of transparent. Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. So the
And
eyeliner.
the opaquely that what Augusta noted, and I think that a lot of other people, sometimes it's described of this type, but often not, is that they have the outward expression of interacting with the world doesn't convey the seriousness a lot of the time that they may experience as part of, let's say, being an FI valuing type that prefers to have a subdued emotionality. That instead, the way that they often choose to express the way that they see themselves is saying things that are opposite what they really mean. Um,
With the
as
eyeliner
Augusta
set?
said, goofy.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And I think it's true, although I think it's not always obvious in what ways
Yeah.
that's true.
I don't think that the eyeliner is like completely serious all the time. Like I think they might be more serious. There's certain things they're more serious about than other ways they're actually. I wouldn't say. I would have said goofy. I would have said.
Yeah, this is a word that it might not be Augusta's word, but it's a word from that I remember from something that's based on one of Augusta's translations.
Goofy is an okay word to use in place of a better word, but more like. Well, never mind. I don't remember.
Absurdist, something like that.
I said
I
it
don't
the
know.
other day. I was talking to Ben and some people, and they said, "Well, look how serious the ILI is." And I'm like, "Well, they're not that serious, really. They're kind of
Yeah,
silly."
all right, that's right. But I think that's a surface tendency, right?
Okay.
Anyway, yes, we can interlude for a minute.
Okay. I'm going to. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're gonna have a minute interlude. You guys can skip forward if you're watching this, and I'm gonna put my.
Can you cut off the video and then turn it back on, or does it not allow that?
I don't know if it allows that, but I'm just gonna turn
Okay,
my
fine.
microphone and video off.
Okay.
Okay, and you should do the same.
I'll just sit here and not do anything.
You should sit there and just make stuff up. Okay.
I think that we will cut this out. Well, I don't know. It requires somebody to actually do the video editing. So that may not happen. But in an ideal world, we would cut this part out. Like, video editing is a thing that can happen if somebody bothers to do it. But I don't even know, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
we are back. I just had to go get some more water.
Maybe if you
So,
had gotten that water in advance, you wouldn't have had to do this.
maybe I shouldn't have drank the first bottle of water, but all right. Okay, so we were talking about gamma, and seriousness.
Wait, before we do that, I need to get some water.
No, no. Um. Okay, so I don't. What is this Roan thing? This dichotomy that Jack uses for seriousness?
There's Riemann dichotomies are linear combinations of Jungian dichotomies, as you may know. So, for instance, the people who are introverted and intuitive, or extroverted and sensing, are one dichotomy. I think it's far-sighted. And by contrast, the combination of introverted and sensing or extroverted and intuitive is carefree. There's an example dichotomy. It just to illustrate that these are combinations of linear combinations of Jungian dichotomies is what Riemann dichotomies are. And one of he didn't discriminate between any of the dichotomies, but it turns out that at least two, arguably three, of his dichotomies are the 11 Riemann dichotomies, which he generated, happen to be trivial in the context of a quadra structure. Actually, four, if you include static dynamic also.
What do you mean by trivial?
Trivial, as in that they're not uniquely combinations of this combination where either you're introverted and intuitive, or else you're extroverted, and therefore this means something. First of all, I don't know what that means, right? It's a linear combination of these dichotomies, and what are the ways in which introverted and intuitive types are similar to extroverted and sensing types that the other combinations of that dichotomy are not? I don't think that makes any sense at all. But he views that these are important, and that all of the possible linear combinations are important. But it turns out that that several of these combinations are linear combinations, indeed, of Jungian dichotomies, but still are superseded by other theoretical concepts, namely quadra values, and in the case of static dynamic, the information element dichotomies. So Mary Sirius is this linear combination of either logical and I think that it's a three. It involves three of the three Jungian dichotomies, which is to say, introverted, logical, and rational, or extroverted, logical, and irrational, and introverted, ethical, irrational, and extroverted, ethical, rational are all Mary, and vice versa for all of the types I didn't mention, which are introverted, ethical, rational, extroverted, logical, rational, introverted, logical, irrational, extroverted, ethical, irrational. Essentially, if you care to think about what all of the groups of types that I just said are, they're all the FE and TI types in the Mary side, and the FI and TE types in the Sirius side. So you can generate that distinction by this combination of these three Jungian dichotomies, ignoring the intuition part, which doesn't have to do with the Mary Sirius thing. So like all of the dichotomies where he made up some stuff about what does the dichotomy do, right? Because he says that this dichotomy where you have far-sighted types and the carefree types says something meaningful about the types involved, which doesn't seem to me that there's anything meaningful about those types. He also says that in the same vein, there's something meaningful about these types that happen to value FE compared to these types that happen to value FI. And I would say that's right, that there is something meaningful about those types, but it's not the fact that they shared some linear combinations of those three dichotomies. And then he gives a description, which is essentially a reading of what it means to either value Fi or Fe, not in the same way that I would emphasize those concepts at all, but something that gets kind of reasonably close, which is essentially what you think of as Mary serious, which is to say that there's a seriousness, much in the way you're describing of the gamma types. It's probably close to what he means by the seriousness in Mary series. And then there's a lack of such a seriousness in the Fe valuing types, which is probably somewhat less, a preference for the way I would say it is a preference for environment and free expression, but I'm not sure that that actually matches what he says about Mary Sirius. I don't know if I've actually read what he writes about it in a while. In the way that you could often think about it colloquially, people like Jack would refer to Mary seriousness probably as environments of positive emotionality. Beta types are not averse to environments of positive emotionality, probably more often than negative emotionality. They prefer environments of positive emotionality. So it's not too far off, but it's not strictly correct, in my view, to see it exactly that way, if that's your interpretation of what it means to be merry, which other people might have different views of exactly what it means to be merry. But, and essentially, it's a Riemann dichotomy that is not a Riemann dichotomy. It's a quadra dichotomy masquerading as such.
Yes. So, yeah,
these other Riemann dichotomies, right? You have this judicious decisive, which is the exact same thing. And I would say that the descriptions of judicious decisive, I would need to read them again because I really don't pay very much attention to this kind of thing. But I would say that in general, they're somewhat less correct than this general idea of seriousness, which is kind of correct. And then there's aristocratic democratic, which says that alpha and gamma types share some characteristics in common, and then delta and beta types share some characteristics in common, which makes very little sense to me because these quadras share nothing in common. So I don't really understand what that even is. It doesn't make any sense.
So which dichotomy was that said that?
This is the democratic aristocratic. So I mean, basically, this dichotomy says if here are these characteristics of, I don't know, either being in groups or not being in groups, that something like that is shared by these opposing quadras. But what is shared by the opposing quadras? They're opposing quadras. That I think it's totally stupid. And then there's aesthetic dynamic dichotomy, which is part of the aspectonic formulation of information elements that Augusta provided. So it's not correctly a Riemann dichotomy, but it is. It can be derived as a combination of the introversion and rationality dichotomies, linear combination of these dichotomies.
Okay, so when Jack and World Socionic Society talks about gamma being serious, what are they talking about?
They're talking about, I mean, most of the time they're talking about the Riemann dichotomy as a proxy for actually talking about, they just mean that it values Fi. And, more directly, I guess what they mean is that they claim that the Riemann dichotomy, which says that the Fi types are serious, is a correct description of the Fi types being serious, which is not so bad. I think then they also say that the decisive types are a good description of the SE valuing types, which I think is much less
Yeah.
great.
Okay. So you don't think decisive is that great of a descriptor?
No, I don't think it's described very well.
Okay. Why?
Not really. Well, I'd have to look at it again, but I mean, intuitively, right? When you see this, what it means is that these types they're firm, they get what they want, uh, as compared to the judicious types, which utilize some tact in getting what they want, which is not really quite right.
I don't really know who the judicious types are, and Mary types, democratic,
SI
aristocratic.
valuing types, the judicious types is SI valuing.
Okay. I'm not going to remember that, but yeah, I'll write it down. Sorry. Kind of broke your stride. Now I don't know what you were talking about. Okay. So what did you say about the judicious types?
I mean, they're just. My recollection is that they're described as not these people that want to that are sort of forceful and get things done their own way, but rather people that utilize tact in order to more cleverly get what they want, or something like this, which I think is just really not the correct way of thinking about this contrast.
Okay. I'm not sure. To me, that would be completely true.
Yeah, it's like I don't pay very much attention to this, so maybe I'm broadly misrepresenting what the Ryan description is. But most of the time, what they mean in practice, the way I treat what they mean is that if someone says John Smith, who posted this video, seems to me to be a judicious type, I would interpret that as SI valuing type and say whatever it is that I have to say, like,
Okay.
no, you are an idiot, that is not possible, or something like that. Regardless of whether or not they refer to the specific description that Ryan provided for what is judicious.
Maybe it means something like the judicious types are more pleasant in their speech and the other ones are not.
I think it's close to that, but again, it's...
I would say that's mostly true.
We can look at the... I don't know about that.
I mean, like, not that they are, just that they aspire to be, that they are, like, conscious of whether... Like, the judicious types would be more conscious of whether someone's speech is pleasant or not, or, like, what they're saying.
What is... It's kind of silly to talk about this. I don't know exactly what the description says or not, and I don't care about it enough to really look at it. So,
okay.
I don't know if that's right. More pleasant.
That's kind of how I see SI.
I don't quite know about that. I think there's more. The way that I think about it, of course, as you may know, is this. You brought it up earlier, which is this question of accepting this or rejecting this. And I think that there's something fundamentally accepting about the any types as well, where they work within the boundaries of, right, the whole up is to improve something that already exists and find a clever way of doing it without interfering with the experience of the functioning system as it is. Whereas the SE type, the NA types, the NI types are rejecting because they're not interested, they're just fundamentally not interested in their environment. And they seem to answer the questions that I give in the questionnaire I'm working as though they're really not interested in their environment. The SE types say that they are interested in their environment, but then they focus on their own goals rather than the functioning of the system as it is now. So I see it as a rejection of reality and an inclination to replace the existing reality that doesn't meet the individual's needs with one that does. So that's closer to the way I see it than this idea that the SI types are somehow more soft-spoken or more or less exacting. I don't know if that's quite what you said. I'm probably using my own language and distorting what you said a little bit. Because it's not, that's less far as the saying that they're less exacting, but it's not right either.
Something like concrete, and also something like the SE types would be more concrete, and they wouldn't. The people who don't value SI would be less likely to give a shit whether what they're saying is offensive or not. And then the ones who value SI instead of SE.
Yeah, all of those things there are not exactly. I mean, those are elements of those attitudes, but they are more complex things.
Yeah. Okay. For me, that's the simple way that I've understood it. I don't really understand it any other way than that.
But you have a particular lens through which you look at the
yeah, true.
the experiences of yeah.
Yeah, generally, like the types that value SI and FE together. I mean, I'm not bashing as a certain quadra, they are opposite from me, but yeah, it seems like they most often disagree with what I have to say if it doesn't feel pleasant to them or something like that. Or they like correct me and like try to make me just, I don't know. It's just kind of a feeling that mostly ESEs actually. So actually I'm talking about. Yeah. Actually, I don't want to say too much.
I don't know what exactly you're talking about, but
I don't want to say.
Let's assume that you were saying about ESEs. There are also 7 other judicious types, SI value types.
Okay. Yes, 7 other types that value SE.
But yeah, whatever.
Okay. That's true. Okay, so yeah, we've talked actually quite a bit about these. Let's talk about delta. Well, actually, have we even finished talking about gamma? Okay, so gamma is described as serious sometimes, or more serious than other quadras, and you think that has something to do with FI and expressing yourself the way you want.
Sure. Expressing yourself the way you want?
I don't know. How would you say that?
Not like that.
Okay.
Preferring environments of subdued emotionality and unambiguous communication.
Yes, that makes exactly. No, like unambiguous communication. Okay. What is another gamma value? Okay, so some people say that they are like the work quadra. Would you say that that is an accurate descriptor?
What is a work quadra?
Not like the work quadra, but a work quadra, like the TE valuing types. Supposedly more goal-oriented and stuff like that.
I have personal difficulty with that. That's right. So there's work. There's something. The answer to your question is no, but there's some merit to thinking about the work quadra. You didn't say. I wanted a better definition, but you didn't give me one. the goal-oriented nature of so TE dominant types are goal-oriented. I think the TE creative types are very little goal-oriented, and varyingly so for instance, like for FI dominant types, sometimes they can be goal-oriented, especially the ESI, but for instance, the EII, not particularly goal-oriented. And the SLI, goal-oriented, not at all, or not really, and ILI also not really. But that being said, you said the work quadra. Well, of course, everyone works.
I probably used the wrong word for that.
I would say that it is TE types that are often more attentively, more consciously focused on, and also interested in their personal productivity. Right? TE types often view the world and their interaction within it by the lens of what they're able to accomplish, what work they're able to accomplish, what work other people do. How well the work of other people is. Whether or not the work of other people is something they can build upon, things like this, whether they can use it. I think there's a conscious, interest is not the right word, there's a conscious orientation towards productivity, not necessarily towards work in the sense of exchange of labor for money, but in the sense of
making use of your time.
Making use of your time, yes, but also in the sense of productivity, literally what you were able to produce.
Okay.
What you as an individual can produce, and what other people as individuals produce.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I would say that FI egotypes have varyingly sensitive attitudes towards this. As I mentioned, the EII, not particularly goal-oriented. Work-oriented, well, it's tricky. Often no, but sometimes, it's a thing that isn't always going to be in their awareness. The SEE and IEE, much more so, I think.
Of spending their time doing things that are like important or productive.
No, I mean, that's not always, but they are attentive to that question.
Okay.
I don't know, would you disagree with that?
I think that the IEE and SEE probably feel a need to be doing.
Sorry, say again?
I think the SEE and the IEE probably feel a need to be doing something that they think is important. Or if they're not, then they might feel an urge to do that.
Okay.
Or that might be some sort of neuroticism for... I don't know. I don't know if it's even connected to TE, but...
Yeah. Well, you answered that question I asked satisfactorily, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I understand your qualifier.
Okay. But at the same time, although they think about it, they may not be that great at coming up with ways to satisfy that urge to do important things. Or I don't even know if the word important is good enough for that.
I mean, how many people? You're right. It isn't somehow, I guess, that TE ego types are good at magically understanding what is the what is their life's purpose in finding the correct career and doing the work associated with that career without complaint. It's that they are consciously occupied with their whatever it is that they're producing, not necessarily that they're interested in or that they're producing the right thing for their unique sense of being as an individual, right? It's the way that you phrased it, which is that you want to find something important. As you said, the I in SE want to find something important to be productive with. Well, there's a finding part, and then there's a part about being attentive to the relevant details of actually doing the producing. And what details are relevant to doing the producing is something that the four different TE ego types have different views on.
I think that, yeah, okay, that definitely makes sense. I'm not sure that if they really know that it's that they're wanting to be productive, or just that they feel like they should be doing something that matters. Is TE more about productivity, or is it more about processes of gaining something?
Gaining
Or is that
something?
the same thing?
What is a process of gaining something? I'm not sure.
Well, I guess setting goals would be to gain something, right?
No, not in my view. Not at all.
Okay.
If you think about I don't think it has anything to do with goals. I think goals is the domain of extroverted sensation, far more so. And you know, so the TE dominant types, right? They have the LIE has extroverted sensation as the mobilizing function. The LSE has extroverted sensation as the demonstrative function. Look at the introverts that are TE ego types. The ILI has extroverted sensation as a suggestive function. The SLI has an ignoring function. Do these types set goals for themselves? Are they the types that you would expect to be the very ambitious people who are constantly goal-oriented and achieve the goals that they set out for themselves?
I think
the ILI maybe sometimes. The SLI, no, not at all.
I think that in a way it's more like a way of thinking, and not necessarily consciously setting goals, but deciding like the steps that you're going to take to do something or have a certain outcome.
Does that have to do with the goal itself? It doesn't, right? It has to do
No, it's just like an outcome. I mean, I think people use the word goal setting because they don't really understand.
Well, I personally have a very this will talk about something that I usually wouldn't talk about, but I have a difficult time with it because I don't see myself as a person that sets goals ever. Maybe I have adapted it somewhat, but in the past, I certainly had the view that setting goals is stupid. It's a waste of time. I don't need to set goals for myself. rather that I'm motivated to do a lot of things, not in the absence of a strict framework that would basically involve setting a goal. I don't know if I would use all the same language now, but the same thing is basically true. I don't think about things in the sense of I'm going to set this goal and then meet it. And if I didn't meet it, I failed as a person or something like this. I think that's silly.
I think that's stupid also, to be honest, but
yeah. This is a very biased way of thinking about it. It's the way that I approach this kind of language. This is what I think of when I encounter this kind of language. And I would put it very differently. When you say that the process of figuring out what are the steps to take in order to achieve some objectively known outcome have to do essentially with understanding. I don't know if the right way of saying it is process. I don't think that process is quite the right term to think about extroverted logic. What is the right term to think about extroverted logic is the accuracy of the information. That is to say, you don't have a process in mind, you have information, which is in the framework of, in the same framework as introverted logic is information, is propositional statements that and introverted logic has explicitly about cause and effect statements, the structural logic which controls things, which is to say, if there are more sellers of bananas in the market, then the supply of bananas will go up without affecting the demand, and this will have this cause of decreasing the price, because that's how the laws of supply and demand work. In the case of TE, the orientation is not on the logical structure, rather on the logical correctness, the robustness and the application in practice of these factual propositional statements. So that is to say, the view is it does not mean anything if you know that this law of supply and demand exists, if you can't actually test it and see if it works. So if you have you want to get in the market of producing bananas because you unrelatedly have the goal of making lots of money, and you think that, well, I don't know, one way of making money would be to sell some bananas. It requires objective knowledge. It requires knowledge of how to produce bananas, and it requires objective knowledge about whether or not these supposed laws that affect the market actually work in the way that they're conjectured to. And I would say all of that, understanding a process is really not understanding a process, it's understanding objective information about the way the world works. I don't know if you're trying to say something, but you're muted.
Am I still muted?
No.
No. Okay. So testable information about the world works, or about how the world works.
Yes, the testable is a theoretical concept, but yes, it's true.
Okay.
But better than testable, measurable.
Okay.
If something isn't, rather, if you can't see something for yourself, then how do you know it's true or not? You need to be able to see clearly that it is correct or not, and to do that, measure it in some way. It doesn't need to be in an objective or a standardized way, but you need to be able to see some effect.
Okay, this is an external thing. Oh, sorry. So the introverted logic is more about. Sorry. TE is an extroverted function, so it's like it's similar to TI in your view, but except that it measures the external world. So would TI measure the internal world?
In the sense that it measures it. Measure is not the correct word. It is an orientation towards the internal world in the sense that it is an orientation towards the internal logical structure of how factual propositions relate to one another. You're muted again.
Yes, that's going unusually slow.
Okay.
Like every time I put my mouse over top of the screen, it takes a second for the microphone button to pop up. Okay, so I'm probably going to change this a little bit as I talk about it because I don't really have as clear a view as you on this. But so TI would be about how you measure facts. You measure facts internally. Is that?
What is the word? Why are we saying measure?
I don't know.
Chronological structure.
No, not measure. Like compare.
No.
No.
It doesn't necessarily have to do with an external application, right? So it seems like you're interpreting it as though it's something different, right? TI is an orientation, an attention to the laws, the principles, if you will, governing the way the world is.
Okay.
That is to say, you have basically internal logical structure. So an example is this law of supply and demand, right? If another seller goes into the marketplace and increases the supply, then the price will go down. It has an objectively understood effect on the price based on the variables that occur in the system. Being able to understand the way that the variables interact to have an outcome on the output variable is the introverted logic part. And extroverted logic can be seen as whether or not that information is accurate in practice. Supply and demand is a pretty good model, but there are some other models that posit relationships between variables and outcomes that prove to be less true in practice.
Okay. Okay, so the distinction is with TE, it's whether it's practical or whether you can implement the laws, and with TI, it's just more about acknowledging those things.
I'd say that is one secondary characteristic of extroverted logic.
Okay. This is a new way of thinking about it for me. Like previously, the only way that I was able to understand TE was something like processes.
Yeah, I think it's very inexact to think of it in this way.
Okay.
The people who like aspectonics are very, very happy to think of it in this way. But I think it's not, it misses something important.
Okay, so words that you used were like practical application, structural network of facts. Is that what you said for TE?
Internal logical structure.
Internal logical structure for TE.
No, for TI.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. I just don't understand how they're different. Okay. Never mind. That makes no sense to me.
Well, they're not different. They're only different in emphasis.
Okay. Okay, I can go back and watch this again and try to make sense of what you said.
Okay. We can talk about it more later, but it has nothing to do with quadra. Or I mean, I would say that it is that quadra values are um, the right prototypical level to which to understand socionics, but they do not supersede the nature of information elements. So it's useful to understand. It's important to understand the nature of information elements in order to understand quadra values, but we're not really talking about quadra values.
Yeah.
That is the quadra messages of these quadras that value this element.
Okay.
In fact, I have the quadra messages of the gamma quadra was what we were talking about. We mentioned seriousness, which this is to do with. We kind of agreed that this has to do with the FI valuing types, all of them. We haven't talked about any of the gamma or delta quadra themes, which, as I view it, as harsh judgment, and then this other thing, which is independence, which is somewhat more difficult to characterize.
Harsh judgment, and does that have to do with character judgment generally?
Yes.
Does it always have to do with character judgment?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and that's one of the things that alphas don't like at all, right? Is that something that they are like very averse to doing?
They dislike being judged. For instance, being judged is contrary to an environment of free expression. By definition, the way that I define it, that is true. But yes, I would say that. But also beta types also prefer environments of free expression. They don't like to be judged. But they find that they also, they're not as averse to conflict. So I think both of those dynamics basically exist in the beta quadra. You can think of it that way.
Okay, so they do actually have character judgment, but it's not based upon...
It's not character judgment.
Okay.
It's judgment, but it's not character judgment.
Would it be something like ideological judgment, or would they be...
That is what it is, but it can also... Okay. The exact ideology involved in ideologic judgment can be very loose. Right. And again, the theme, one of the driving themes of the beta quadra, as I see it, is authenticity and passion. Passion and energizability is a much more basic theme. Somebody who is judged to be non-authentic is also subject to judgment, but the ideology is much more subtle in this abstract sense of being willing to express oneself and not being able to express, as somebody who is not genuinely expressing themselves seen as wrong in this sense. It's not very closely ideological judgment. It's just the way that the conscious structure of these themes plays out, in my view.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely understandable. Okay, so gamma. They are subdued interactive. You mentioned that. What does that mean? Do you remember saying that?
So they're what? They're subdued interactive?
I think that's what you said. I wrote
interaction.
Okay.
They prefer subdued interaction.
Subdued interaction. Yeah. Okay. I was taking notes on what you said and wrote it down. Yeah. Okay. So subdued interaction, is that like subdued emotion, like subdued emotionality?
Yes.
Okay. And does that mean vague, like vague emotional expression?
No.
Oh.
What are they? Did they dislike vague emotional expression? No, I don't. I wouldn't say that they dislike vague emotional expression. I would say they have a preference for unambiguous emotional expression.
Okay. So more direct.
Yes.
Okay. Unambiguous. I will write that down. All right. So are there any? What? I think I don't know if something's wrong with my video card or something like that, but like everything just keeps going slower and slower. I'm gonna turn off my video or something.
Huh?
It might. I don't know if that will help, but so are there are there any other quadra themes of gamma that?
So there, as I said, independence. Well, I mentioned it,
Okay,
but it's complicated, and we have been going on for a long time. And if we go in great depth with all of the remaining themes, we would be going until like 4 a.m., which I don't want to do.
Okay. We can cut it off here and start another time with gamma.
Perhaps that would be good.
Okay.
It's because we've been going for like 2 hours.
Yeah, it's definitely been going on and on. All right.
There's a lot to say about this, and I think that the discussion is. I mean, I don't think this is a problem for several reasons, as we said. Right, we have 5 viewers, as we've been discussing, and it's useful to interact in a way that's truly pedagogical. But it may also be useful to. If what you're interested in is quadra values, there's 2 separate topics, which are the nature of information elements, and then the nature of quadra values, which is what is the theme that results when you block these elements together. And I think that if you take notes of the right questions to pose about these the quadra themes, we could go through them in a much more streamlined way, if that makes sense. Like addressing the concepts that are at the heart of these questions and that are somewhat difficult to understand without being sidetracked by all of the other things. And it's not bad to be sidetracked with all the other things. It's just it's not a presentable piece of output. Or, I mean, maybe it is, but it's not as good of a presentable nugget.
It's not organized.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, that's fine. I think we talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
But we didn't really get down to the questions that I was looking for because of all getting sidetracked, which is really, I just want to talk about quadra values.
Right.
Or get like an organized understanding of your views of what quadra values are.
Yeah.
Okay, but we can continue in this format. Well, anyways, let's end the broadcast and we'll talk more.
Okay.
Okay.